Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it one more minute for folks to trickle in. All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Teresa Bowie. I'm the Climate Policy Director with Pacific Environment. And with me are my colleagues Fern, our Climate Campaign Director for Ports, as well as Jane Stevenson, Climate Policy Associate. And big thanks to Jane for helping me put this webinar together. And of course, Grant Management Associates for sharing their expertise. So we couldn't have timed this webinar better ourselves. After months of anticipation, EPA just released their notice of funding opportunities for the $3 billion in Clean Ports program funding just this morning, and we're really excited to do a deep dive later today. For those who don't know us, Pacific Environment is a nonprofit environmental group dedicated to protecting communities and the environment around the Pacific Rim. We are committed to getting ships off fossil fuel as soon as possible and advocating at the local, state, and federal and international levels for policies that advance a decarbonized global shipping sector. We have a permanent constituted status at the International Maritime Organization, which sets global shipping laws. Right now, there's growing momentum towards decarbonization. Just last July, the IMO adopted a revised greenhouse gas strategy at the MEPC 80 summit, where member countries agreed to achieve net zero emission by or around 2050 with interim targets. And in March 2023, the EU agreed to the world's first green shipping fuel laws known as the Fuel EU Maritime. As environmental advocates, we know that we have ambitious demands to get the shipping industry and ports to zero emission by 2040 in this decade of climate emergency, which is why we're also trying to find solutions as much as possible by doing things like this webinar to help promote funding opportunities available to support the zero emission transition. We're open to thinking creatively with you all to accelerate the zero emission port and shipping transition. And we recognize the importance of funding to support this, which is why we're supporting funding opportunities at the state and federal level. At the federal level, we're advocating for the International Maritime Pollution Accountability Act, which would raise an estimated $250 billion over the next 10 years for maritime decarbonization by levying a pollution fee on the largest marine vessels. And part of this funding would help to support zero and low carbon maritime technologies and provide recurring funding for EPA's Clean Port Program and DOT PIDP program if passed. We also advocate at the state level provide support letters for zero emission port projects. For example, in Washington last year, we were supporting over nearly $50 million in funding for port electrification and supporting additional funding this year for shore power at ports. And we're working with ports in California to get funding through the legislature through the Climate Act Bond. With that, I'm excited to introduce you to Fern, our Climate Campaign Director, Ports, to say a few words. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. And thank you so much for joining us on our webinar today. So just maybe to say a little bit about some of our work, particularly the Ports of People, which is the work that me and my team lead on. So together with local communities and allies and partners, Ports for People campaign really advocates for ports to move away from fossil fuel-based operations and to rapidly transition to zero-emission operations. And so some things we do is we work with ports to adopt ambitious emission reduction goals and decarbonization plan. We also support the development of port electrification and other infrastructure to enable ports to transition to zero emission operations, especially as ports are seeking funding, which is what we're talking about today. We also help to facilitate implementation of a number of green shipping corridors, and we have teams and presence based in Korea, in South Korea, and Singapore. And so I just want to highlight a couple of things. Because ports are such a major multimodal freight hubs, we at PE really believe that ports have a critical role to play in the decarbonization of the freight sector, especially in the hard-to-abate sector like shipping. And so many of you may already be familiar with the global movement to decarbonize the shipping industry, which accounts for 3% of the global greenhouse gases emissions. And by one estimate, it is going to require 2 trillion of global investment to decarbonize shipping. And around 80% of this cost is actually going to be on the land side investment. So we're talking about some of the funding that that's available to US ports now. And that's part of the 2 trillion global investments that is going to be needed. So we really believe that ports can take action to reduce emissions from their own operations and then also take other measures to assist other port-related transportation modes in their transition to zero emission. The last thing I wanted to highlight as we're talking about really funding, that many of the funding opportunities that GMA will cover today is derived from the bipartisan infrastructure legislation and the Inflation Reduction Acts. And a major directive from the Biden administration in the use of this fund is just the Justice 40 directive, which I'm sure most, if not all of you, are very much aware. And it's the goal of the directive to ensure that 40% of the overall benefits from these federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities. And as I'm sure most of you are also aware, most, if not all of the ports in the US are actually in or adjacent to disadvantaged communities who have historically been impacted from ports pollution. In fact, EPA estimates that around 39 million people in the US live near ports. And so I think part of this webinar is that we just want to encourage ports to engage with with communities on stakeholder consultations to make sure that there's portside communities are meaningfully involved in determining the program benefits as you seek out some of these fundings. And I'll turn it over to the Grant Management Associates and pass it over to Brad.
Thanks, Fern. My name is Brad Zerby. I'm one of the executive team members for Grant Management Associates. We're here to help you win these grants. There's never been this kind of money out there. We're one of the premier grant firms in the world. We're north of 500 clients, and we have over 50 grant writers. And best of all, our win rate's just over 90%, which is pretty amazing in this industry. So we look forward to helping you. I'm going to pass the baton to our Director of Research, Tom Kenny, who's near a port somewhere in Maine, I think, right now, right, sir?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Thanks, Brad. And thanks everyone for tuning in. So I'm going to be running the slides and chatting with you guys today about some funding opportunities coming through. So for GMA, I'm the Director of Research. So my role for Grant Management Associates is to keep my eye on everything that's coming through for grants and see what's been happening in the past and what's happening in the future and helping people navigate through those things. So today, what we're going to cover is grant landscape, typical requirements of grants, considerations for applying. To start us off, just to get everyone on the same page, we're going to take a look at a solicitation or request for proposal. In case some folks haven't seen those before, they're not familiar with them, just wanted to get everyone on the same page to start off. And then we're going to jump into Justice 40, which Fern mentioned, chat a little bit about trends in electrification and hydrogen. We've got two Q&A sessions, one in the middle, one at the end. Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A along the way, and we'll be keeping an eye on those. If you ask specific questions about your project, and if we can't look those answers up on the call today, then we'll get back to you. We'll email out answers to the group so that everyone can take a look at those. So feel free to fire away, and we'll grab some answers for you. So after the first Q&A, we're going to be reviewing some specific funding opportunities, one being the Clean Ports program that Teresa mentioned. We've been anticipating that release, and such a timely release. We were going through that solicitation, grabbing some details to put in the slideshow for you all to review that. We'll have a few other programs to review, and then we're going to hear from Tom Decker from the International Council on Clean Transportation. He's got some things to go over, which are pretty exciting. And then we'll talk about next steps and some upcoming webinars and finish it off with a final Q&A. So jumping into the grant landscape. So for port funding, typically the agencies we would look at are Environmental Protection Agency or EPA and the Department of Transportation, DOT. There's also the Maritime Administration within DOT that can fund some of these projects. Not to say that the funding is exclusive to those agencies, but typically you would find their funding is more geared towards port projects or freight movement, things like that. So that is that. And so typical requirements of grants. Some things to consider when looking at grant funding. There are some things that can sometimes be hidden requirements that you might not know unless you're familiar with the grant, with grants in general. So the first one to mention is the SAM.gov registration. SAM stands for System for Award Management. And anytime that you're working with the federal government, you'll have to have a SAM registration or unique entity identifier. So that's how they identify your entity among all the others looking for federal funding. So you'll need to get that registration, and the reason for bringing it up on this call is it takes typically 6 to 8 weeks to get that registration completed. And so thinking about that time frame, if you're looking at a grant that's due in about 6 to 8 weeks, that could put you in jeopardy of not being able to apply. So that's something to definitely consider. If you don't have a unique entity identifier through sam.gov, or you need to update it, definitely consider that. Jump on there and get that number up to date. Another thing to consider for a requirement is a benefits cost analysis. Some of the grants that we will be covering today will require a benefits cost analysis, and that can be a pretty intense process to go through. It can require a lot of work and a lot of analysis there, so that's something to consider when you're getting your ducks in a row. Equipment documentation is something to consider if you're looking for a repower or replacement of equipment or a vessel. If you're working with equipment that's on the older side, sometimes it's harder to track down that documentation. Sometimes it's hanging out in a glove box or something like that, maybe. And you want to track that down. Budgets and identifying needs. So it can take some time to get estimates together and scope out a project. So it's important to get those items together. Most grants, if not all grants, will require a budget. Timelines and work plans. Getting these details together is really important. Having a general sense of when you want your project to take place, what your milestones are, things like that, making sure it lines up with the period of performance for the grant. That's going to be key to making sure that the funding will be worthwhile. All right, so some other considerations. We talked about registrations for applying. We want to make sure those are complete. Partnerships are another thing to consider. Partnerships are a big part of grants these days. So partnering with nonprofits, community-based organizations, even if you're doing a large infrastructure project, can be really helpful. We're going to talk about Justice 40 in a little bit in a couple of slides. And those partnerships are really, really vital to putting forth a competitive application. Matching funds, this is part of the budget, but matching funds are really important to consider. Most grants will require 20 to 50 or more % matching funds, so the amount of money that's coming from your entity towards that effort. And it's important to consider those funds because you need to have them available to make the project work, but also it's important when considering the scope of work and how much money it will take to complete that effort. So you might have to put more matching funds in than are actually required. So important to consider how much matching funding you're able to put towards the effort. We talked about timeline a little bit, but thinking through your goals, milestones, objectives, all those things and mapping it out, making sure that it makes sense. And does it line up with the grant in the way that it needs to for a successful project? Complexity of the application process is something that we talk about a lot at GMA. So some grants are more complex than others. And so thinking about the time and resources required to apply and the likelihood of success can be a really important piece to look at. So if something's really competitive, there's only a few winners, and it's a massive application, we might take a look at the scoring criteria, do some pre-scoring and kind of figure out what that looks like and whether it's worth the time. Technical assistance can be helpful. There's some technical assistance programs you can apply for to receive that assistance. And sometimes agencies will offer technical assistance for applicants to get them on the right track to success. And then grant management. So this is post-award. This is a whole other world to consider in the grants world. So thinking about, the application piece of this is just one part. Just the first part of the work. When we're awarded the grant, there's a whole other side. So thinking about, do you have the accounting systems set up that are required to track the funds and reporting requirements? Do you have the staff in place to make all those things happen? So, all right. So we're going to jump into navigating a solicitation. So I'm just going to switch my screen really quick. So we're actually going to pull up the Clean Ports program. And looks like we're good to go. Okay. So just wanted to navigate through a solicitation with you guys really quick and just make sure everyone's sort of familiar with how things are laid out. Typically, you'll see kind of a title page and then it will jump into a table of contents. So this is a nice way to see how everything's broken down so it's a little less overwhelming. So this solicitation looks like it's 57 pages. So, some light reading, we usually say. The nice thing about these solicitations is a lot of these table of contents are hyperlinked. So if you want to jump to that part of the solicitation, you can just click on those hyperlinks. And so looking at the table of contents, we can kind of see what's in here. So background and summary, program goals and objectives, funding details, award details, period of performance, eligible entities, all these different things are included in here. One thing to take a close look at is the evaluation criteria. So this is something we look at quite a bit when we're pre-vetting a project. Take a look at the evaluation criteria, what the reviewers are actually going to be using to score the grant, the proposal that you submit. This can give you a good idea of what needs to be included and the level of detail they'll be looking for. And also, how much of the overall points are certain things worth. So like this section here is worth 29 points versus these sections is 20 and 28 or 20 and 8. So taking a look at those will give you an idea of how heavily something is weighted versus something else. So that way you can put more emphasis on those things and get as many points as you can. So the grant world is very competitive and you want to get as many points as you can. We often tell people that, you know, the folks that don't win the award often lose by just 1 point. So it's very competitive. So we want to grab every point that we can. So if you aren't familiar with navigating through a solicitation, I would just take it piece by piece. It can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes to look at all these requirements and all the things that are required, you know, things that you need to do, hoops to jump through. But if you take it piece by piece, it helps quite a bit. And then I usually use that table of contents to help me steer through the solicitation. So I'm going to jump back to slides, just 1 second. All right, and we're back. So next we're going to chat about the Justice 40 initiative. And Dory, if you could take this one, that would be great.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So talking again, Fern touched on the Justice 40 piece. Well, you'll see that in a lot of federal grants now. That was through the Biden-Harris administration. So they have the Justice 40 that ensures 40% of the benefits of federal investment go to disadvantaged communities. And they have that in the scoring criteria. And they also have a link where you can see, and I added it on there if your location is in that. But as Fern touched on, most of the ports, when I looked at them, are either in a disadvantaged community or has one nearby. The other piece that they have are now community benefit plans. And in those community benefit plans, they're also asking for your plan not only on the Justice 40, but on workforce, how information on the workers. They're going all into that, and the partnerships. So again, they're looking at that partnership piece with those federal grants. And those community benefit plans, now I've seen those anywhere from 5 pages, but they have been going up to like 12 pages, and they can be up to 20% of the points for the grant.
Yeah, definitely an important piece to consider. And like I said, partnerships can be really important for that too, getting involvement from the community and things like that. So, all right. So trends in electrification and hydrogen. So just kind of setting the scene here for us. You know, we're all here looking at grants that are focused on efficiency and reduction of GHGs, air quality, cost savings. There are a lot of benefits to consider when you know, switching over to electric or hydrogen operations. So glad that you're all here with us today. And so looking at an opportunity here that Pacific Environment has for all of you is the ability to apply for some funding Pacific Environment has available to assist with applications. So Pacific Environment will be helping to jumpstart applications and pre-vet your projects with us at GMA to consider how competitive the opportunity will be compared to your project. So we have this form here, which I think maybe Jane can put that in the chat for you guys if it's not there already. But we have a form where we're asking for some information about your project and identifying a funding opportunity or two that you might be most interested in. And we'll be looking at those submissions and deciding, you know, who will be able to help with that funding. So we're looking mainly at green shipping projects. And Teresa, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add on this specifically.
Yeah, hi. So we have a small funding opportunity available. So you know, in the form, there's a due date for that, but we're looking to help support projects that are zero emissions or shore power projects or zero emission shipping. Thanks, Tom.
Sorry, I lost my toolbar for a minute. Yeah, no problem. So the forum will close on March 19th. And if you guys want to check that out, if you have questions about it or anything like that, feel free to shoot us an email. And with that, we'll jump into first Q&A. I don't see any open questions right now, but I'm not sure if anyone has anything they want to discuss right yet.
Anyone has any questions, we welcome you to raise your hand and we can unmute you. Or if not, you can put them in the chat and we can get to them in the second Q&A.
We'll give it another minute, maybe.
Okay, we've got a raised hand. Oh, I think it is lowered now. Sorry, if you were trying to ask a question, I'm not seeing your hand anymore, so feel free to raise it. Okay, I've got Charles. I'm going to allow you to talk. Okay, Charles, you're unmuted, or you can unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. The chat is disabled, so we can't put items on the chat. Just wanted to mention that.
Oh, okay. Are you is the Q&A working? Oh, looks like it is.
Are you able to put questions in the Q&A? Yeah, I'm seeing a question now.
Oh,
so
yeah, perfect. Okay.
you can
Thank
put them
you.
there. Yep, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so looks like we have a question about Justice 40 projects, models, and examples to look to. Yeah, my advice on this would be if you're looking at a particular grant, especially one that maybe is annual, you might be able to look at previously funded projects and see what models they built into their grant for that. And yeah, I think there are definitely some other ways to build in some of these components, specifically around partnering with nonprofits or community-based organizations, partnering with them to really create a robust community benefits plan, I think is helpful. It shows that when you're partnering with those folks, it shows that you're looking beyond just, checking off the requirements, the boxes for the requirements, and really trying to dig into things and make a difference. So yeah, Fern, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, as Tom said, I mean, I think engaging with Portside representatives of Portside communities, community-based organizations, environmental justice groups near Port, and to do it as early as possible, and not just like engage once, but, actually have an ongoing process to engage with them. I might point to this is a little while ago, but I do remember, and we can share this, actually, we can probably share a list of some previous grant applications that we see, strong evidence of strong community engagements, as well as investments in components of the projects that really benefit communities. And sometimes it goes even beyond emissions reductions benefits. So really think about a wide range of environmental justice benefits that can come from a port project. I might point to Port of Oakland because that's the port I'm quite familiar with on their website, and I can share this. Some past applications, and you can see from the support letters that they get that include support letters from community groups, and that has been really helpful for the application.
Yeah, let me speak to this. So this is where everybody's losing.
grants. We just won $100 million grant for a manufacturing plant. They took a swing and didn't win, and then we helped them. We are now talking to the DOE. They just redid their templates for community benefit plans. We have them. I'm not sure many people do, but they now have a new criteria, which is really bizarre. They actually can grade you based on how dedicated they feel you are to doing the Justice 40 initiative, that you're not just making it up. I used to work in government and run grant programs. There's quite a lot of latitude. So this is where you get the football in the end zone. And we have actually a whole business unit that does this. And it's a very, very, very important part of the grant. It's not easy to do. And I appreciate that question. It's an excellent one.
Yeah, and then the letters of support is another thing to think about, like Fern said. And even now we're seeing more requests for letters of commitment. So really outlining the scope of work and how that partner will be involved versus, someone writing a more generic letter of how they support the effort, really showing how they're a part of it is a big piece of that too. So. Next question is, what is an example of green shipping, as you mentioned? Teresa, I don't know if you have examples on this.
Yeah, and Fern, feel free to jump in. But so for us, we support electrifying everything first, and then fuel systems and such as like battery, wind propulsion, solar, as well as green hydrogen in fuel cell form. And so, yeah, and then on the land side, it would be shore power for ships to plug in or for hovercraft to plug in when they're idling at berth. Thanks.
Great. And then we had another question about how applicants will be evaluated.
I assume this is on the Jumpstart or
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So what we're looking for is the willingness from ports to engage with community members. We are prioritizing smaller ports because they have less capacity for grant writing, and that the funding that the project itself is truly zero emission. So again, anything battery related, hydrogen fuel cell or shore power projects, or like a vessel, zero emission vessel. Thank you.
Thanks. I don't see, oh. Ooh. Yeah, so the gentleman talking about Justice 40 and DOE templates is Brad Zerby. He's the Director of Business Development for Grant Management Associates. Yeah, you're welcome, Jen. All right. Any other questions before we move on? Dive into some opportunities. All righty. So let's jump into some funding opportunities. So these are the opportunities we'll be looking at today. We'll take a little bit more time on the EPA Clean Ports program because it's new, and I wanted to pull some slides, develop some slides before this so that you guys would be well informed on that new program. Whoops, sorry. And then we have some other funding opportunities. Some of these are more annual opportunities. So that's really helpful in forecasting when they'll come out, and so you can start to build your scope of work, your proposal a little bit early. So can help get you ahead of the competition a little bit, right? So the EPA Clean Ports program just released today, hot off the press. We're looking at a deadline of May 28th. There's an optional notice of intent to apply that's due March 28th, but that's optional, so no pressure there. There's two sub-programs to this. So there's a zero emission technology deployment competition, and that funds zero emission port equipment and infrastructure to reduce mobile source emissions at US ports, really focusing on cleaner air. And then there's another program, the Climate and Air Quality Planning Competition, which focuses on climate and air quality planning activities for ports. And we'll go into what we're looking at for each of those. So eligibility is similar for both of these. So it's going to be port authorities, state, regional, local, or tribal agencies having jurisdiction over ports. Could be private entities owning, operating, and using facilities, cargo handling equipment, transportation equipment, those things. So just thinking about this and eligibility, there might be some folks here that would benefit from partnerships if they aren't able to be a prime applicant. They may be looking for partners to be the prime applicant, and they could be a sub-applicant on this, depending on how you're structured and all that good stuff. So the zero emission technology deployment competition, this is a grid of the funding ranges here. So they've got some different tiers. They're talking about water ports versus dry ports, funding ranges. So pretty good amount of funding allowed here with a pretty decent amount of anticipated awards. Cost share is looking good on this. So, there's definitely going to be some interest on this. So I would recommend taking a good look at this one, looking at specifically what they'll fund. These are some project activities. So they've got the zero emission mobile equipment, so cargo handling equipment, locomotives, rail car movers, hovercraft, and other vessels. Then they've got the infrastructure to serve the equipment. So this was an interesting one for me looking at it. They've got charging infrastructure, battery energy storage systems that integrate with solar and wind power systems. And then they've got hydrogen fueling infrastructure. So this is really great. I mean, basically you could create a microgrid on site for this equipment integration. So that's really great. And then they also have support activities. So project-specific public engagement, safety planning and protocol development, operational planning, workforce training, project management, permit applications, and others. So really nice that they built that into this, because there's so many aspects to making the transition that grants don't always pay for. And so some of these things are really nice to have. Programmatic priorities, so some of the things that they'll be looking at for scoring criteria could be environmental justice and disadvantaged communities, port transformation and pollution reduction, which we've been talking about those things, and the non-attainment areas. So yeah, definitely important to consider those priorities and see how your project kind of stacks up against some other potential applicants there. For the climate and air quality planning competition, this one funds planning activities focusing on one or more ports, and they're looking at emissions inventory and accounting exercises, strategic analysis and goal setting, stakeholder collaboration and communication, and resilience planning. The award ranges are smaller on this one, 200,000 to 3 million, and still a good amount for planning for sure. Example of potential projects, just mentioned those. In the solicitation, they have specifics, breakdowns of these. I couldn't include them all in the slides or we'd be here for a while, but take a look through those example projects because they're kind of telling you what they're looking for in there. So that's that. And so the programmatic priorities, again, environmental justice and disadvantaged communities, non-attainment areas, and then they've got emissions reductions. So yeah, it's the Clean Ports program is definitely one to take a look at. It's brand new. So sometimes with brand new programs, it can be a little more challenging when putting together an application because you don't always have the knowledge of, with an annual grant, who's been funded previously, and you can kind of use that in your strategy. So with newer programs, it's really exciting that they're around and they offer a lot of opportunity. But yeah, it's definitely worthwhile to jump on this one early. I'm sure that there will be a lot of interest. The next program is the DOT Small Shipyards Grants. This one's forecasted for spring of 2024. It does come around annually. The award amount is typically 75% of eligible costs, and it will fund things like capital and related improvements, training for workers in shipbuilding, ship repair, and associated industries. And the projects that they're looking at, they want to drive efficiency, competitive operations, quality ship construction, repair, reconfiguration across the industry. So could work in some really interesting projects here. There is specific eligibility for facilities that are fewer than 1,200 production employees. So you'll want to make sure that you're at that size if you're interested in this grant. And when looking at the previous awards on this, I noted that the average award seemed to be around 1 million. So, depending on what your capital project is, you could be awarded more than that, I'm sure. But just something to keep in mind that it's in that range. Infrastructure for Rebuilding America. This is an interesting opportunity. It's not specific to ports. It does incorporate a lot of other things, but ports are included in this. So this program itself is part of the multimodal sorry, let me grab my note. Multimodal project grant, I believe. So there's 3 subcategories. This is one of them. So this is sort of the middle size of projects. So it will award $12 to $1 billion for projects. 60 to 80% matching funds are required. This one's forecasted for August, and it comes around annually. The thing with this one is they're looking for nationally or regionally significant projects to improve safety, efficiency, and reliability of movement of freight and people in and across rural and urban areas. So ports are a part of this. They're also looking at marine highway corridors and things like that, and reducing emissions can be a part of this grant. So with this one, the big thing is that it will require a lot of partnerships if you're looking at a regionally or your nationally significant project. So on this one, it's definitely important to start early, start planning with partners early, and figuring out community benefits planning and things like that can be really helpful. Benefits cost analysis, or for a regionally significant project, is going to be quite a bit of work. So definitely some pre-work on this one to consider, but an opportunity to consider nonetheless. And Port Infrastructure Development Program. I think Dory was going to jump into this one.
I am.
Next few.
I am.
Thanks.
So the deadline for this one is April 30th, and the award amount is approximately 1 million to 165 million with a 20% match. And this supports efforts by ports and industry stakeholders to improve ports and related freight infrastructure to meet the nation's freight transportation needs. And for eligibility, this is a grant for like Port Authority, a commission, or a subdivision of an agency under an existing authority. So if a private entity or private group would like to apply for this, they need to partner with eligible lead entities that are listed under the eligibility. And also for all of these slides, we will be sending these out, but we have the links in there so that you can look these up. There's a link to the website, and then there's also the link to the funding opportunity. So if you want to get more information, you can take a look at those. The next opportunity is the Marine Highway Program. So this one is another forecasted one. We're thinking it's going to be around April 30th. There's no maximum or minimum award size, so the overall amount available is 12 million. So this is through the DOT Maritimes Administration, and this is providing discretionary funding for projects that provide a coordinated and capable alternative to landslide transportation or promote marine highway transportation. So the grant funds would be used for low to zero emission landslide equipment and infrastructure like docks, ramps, charging equipment, and vessels. So the eligibility is a political subdivision or state or local government, planning commissions, port authority, tribal governments. And so again, with this one, applicants are encouraged to develop coalitions with private-public partnerships, which might include the vessel owners, third-party logistics, trucking companies, shipping, railroad, port authority, state, regional, local transportation, or in any combination. And then we have the links again for that. And then we also have the Maritime Environmental and Technical Assistance, the META program. And the META program promotes the research and demonstration and development of emerging technologies, practices, and processes that improve maritime industrial environmental sustainability. So this has been, focus areas have been control of aquatic invasive species transported by vessels and reduction in vessel and port air emissions. So these two areas are a continuing challenge. And so this grant would help with the technical assistance to look at these processes. And the eligibility is project dependent. But eligible applicants typically include industry, academia, nonprofit, and non-governmental agencies. And then there's the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act funding. This one will come around again in December. And so I added in some award amounts, and they are dependent by state. So I added some states in there based on some of the people who are watching the webinar. And so if I missed your state, you can put it out there and I can get you information on that. But this program funds grants and rebates that protect human health and improve air quality by reducing harmful emissions from diesel engines. So the focus of this grant is reduction of emissions. And you can see the eligible vehicle engines and equipment that they have on there. And so it's also the handling of cargo, including at port locations. And the next slide has the cost share, the funding limits and the cost share amounts and it goes by the type of equipment that you are looking to replace. And these additional opportunities, this was from the previous webinar that we had, but we thought we wanted to put these on here again, just so that you see this for the opportunities for repower of harbor crafts. And so we put all of those additional opportunities along with the links on there for you.
Yeah, and so these are focused on repower, replacement of hovercraft or other equipment. So one note to make is this Clean Off-Road Equipment Voucher Incentive Program, CORE. Not quite sure if that one will be coming back around again, so we'll keep an eye on that, but just wanted to make that note. But these other programs are definitely interesting. Some of them, like VW Mitigation Trust, these funds and actually some of these other ones are first come, first serve. So thinking about that, it's always better to jump on submitting an application as soon as you can and making sure that, you're not waiting until the funding is close to running out. So, and then we've got DEER on there too, which Dory just mentioned. So great.
So, and next we'll hear from Tom Decker with the International Council on Clean Transportation, who will speak on how they quantify the emissions reduction and human health benefits of port electrification activities.
Awesome. Thank you, Dorian. Thank you, Tom. So my name is Tom Decker. I'm an associate researcher on the ICCT Marine team. We're a nonprofit research organization that provides policymakers with the data and analysis they need to avoid, reduce, and eliminate pollution from the transportation industry. Today, I'm going to be talking about our previous and upcoming work estimating emissions at ports and quantifying emissions reductions. I'm going to start by discussing a previous ICCT report on the air quality and health benefits of port electrification. And then I'll talk about a pro bono, first come, first serve collaboration opportunity, and finish up briefly with an upcoming ICCT US port emissions analysis. So first off, this is the previous analysis that I was talking about. It was published in 2023, and it sought to answer the question, how can port electrification reduce air pollution, improve air quality, and benefit public health in the US? The authors used the ports of Seattle and New York, New Jersey as case studies, and they estimated the emissions reductions from electrifying OGVs hovercraft, and drayage trucks. They then modeled the air quality and public health benefits that electrification would have in near port communities. Next, please. So these are the port areas that were used in the studies, and they combined the ICCT's Global Port Emissions Inventory Tool, also known as GO-PEIT, with our Systematic Assessment of Vessel Emissions tool to estimate the emissions from, like I said, OGVs, hovercraft, and drayage trucks from 2019. And then they modeled the emissions in a full electrification scenario that assumed 100% shore power connection for OGVs while at berth in ports, and 100% electrification of hovercraft and trucks. So the baseline and the full electrification scenario results were then both put into the intervention model for air pollution, also known as INMAP, which is an open source reduced complexity model that estimates the air quality and health impacts of emissions on nearby regions. The two scenarios were then compared to see how human health effects were next. So the two main tools that were used were the ICCT's Global Online Port Emissions Inventory tool, like I mentioned, and the intervention model for air pollution. GO-PEIT is a free, publicly available tool that we developed to estimate emissions from vessels and landside port equipment. It requires the inputs of equipment activity data, such as hours of engine use, vehicle kilometers traveled, and fuel used for major port-related equipment. And then it estimates air pollution emissions and GHG emissions. And then INMAP is an open source reduced complexity model that estimates the annual average concentration change in PM 2.5 and the resulting mortality risk of port emissions from OGVs, hovercraft, and drayage trucks. You can find more detailed information on these tools and on the methodology in the report, but I'll share a few key figures now. This slide shows the baseline versus the full electrification scenarios at the Port of Seattle. On the left, the orange figure shows the PM 2.5 concentration in micrograms per cubic meter for the baseline and the full electrification scenario. The full electrification scenario clearly shows a significant reduction in the PM 2.5 concentration, but there is still some, and that's due to the fact that the scenario only accounts for emissions that shore power would be able to reduce, which would be the auxiliary engine emissions from vessels at berth. So the remaining PM 2.5 concentration you still see is from OGV cruising, maneuvering, and anchoring phases. And then the blue and purple figure on the right shows the change in annual PM 2.5 concentration and the benefit in terms of avoided premature deaths from that full electrification scenario. So in this situation in Seattle, the full electrification scenario would avoid about 3 premature deaths per year and represent over $27 million in public health benefits per year. Next. And then this shows the baseline versus the full electrification scenario at the Port of New York, New Jersey. In the full electrification scenario, 16 deaths would be avoided, which would represent about $150 million in public health benefits. So even though these specific scenarios are very specific to New York and Seattle and a full electrification scenario, this kind of quantification can be applied to many scenarios unique to different ports. And we believe that this kind of analysis can really help various ports supplement their electrification applications to give them a stronger case to receive funding from any of the programs that we heard about today. Next slide, please. So now we'd like to offer a pro bono first come, first serve opportunity to assist a port in conducting similar analysis to supplement these federal funding applications. So we would work with a port or multiple ports to apply unique scenarios of interest using that GoPEIT and InMap models. And this kind of work, as I mentioned, would be very beneficial to applicants to demonstrate public health benefits that their proposed projects would yield. And for any further information, please contact me at t.decker@theicct.org. Next slide. And then I briefly want to touch on an upcoming national port emissions inventory that we're planning to release in the coming months. The goal of this inventory is to identify U.S. ports as candidates for shore power based on air pollutant emissions and population living near the port. So the report estimates air pollutants from, again, at-berth vessels at ports across the nation. And due to the large-scale nature of this kind of analysis, rather than using specific port terminals, we used 5 nautical mile buffers around the geolocations of each port, which is the area that we collected emissions from the vessel's berthing. This figure here represents the air pollutant estimates from auxiliary engines of at-berth vessels. So theoretically, these are all emissions that shore power can reduce or eliminate under a 100% electrification scenario. The report also estimates the population of low-income households surrounding each port to identify ports with high air pollutant emissions that are also near a large number of lower-income households. We hope to publish this in the next few months, and I think it'll be especially important to ports without existing emissions inventories, so they can kind of use this broad-scale report as a rough baseline. And then I will say these results are not published quite yet, so please don't share outside of this call. Next slide. And then, yeah, as Jane mentioned, for any more information, please reach out to me at t.decker@theicct.org.
Thanks so much, Tom. Super helpful to have that support in an application looking at the air quality and things like that. Takes a lot of work to get those numbers down. So very good. So take action today. So we've reviewed quite a bit on this webinar today and wanted to sum things up in these last couple slides. So take action today. Grants are, definitely they can be a longer term strategy, but they're very deadline driven. So, example is the Port Infrastructure Development Program is due at the end of April. So, it's February now, March is going to fly by, and so is April. So start taking a look at some of these deadlines and thinking through your scope of work and your projects and things like that. And if you're interested, apply to the opportunity that Pacific Environment has for some application assistance through Grant Management Associates. If you're finding that your application or your project is a little bit outside of what Pacific Environment is interested in helping with, and you're looking for some help with grants, feel free to reach out to Dory, Brad, or myself, and we'll post some contact information. So we've got Teresa's email there, my email there. Feel free to reach out with any questions, anything like that. And there's some another upcoming webinar that we have on the 20th of March for environmental justice funding. So we have a few opportunities. We'll go through specific ones that I think of off the top of my head are EPA opportunities, community change grants that are fairly new. So we'll take a closer look at those and see what kind of impacts we can make with that funding. So, and then it looks like there's an expo here, Electric and Hybrid Marine World Expo. Not Pacific Environment affiliated, but that's March 13th and 14th in Long Beach, California. And our final Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw those in the Q&A and we'll take a look. Looks like we have one now for Tom Decker. There are all types of illnesses. There are all types of illnesses avoided in addition to premature deaths, such as asthma and cancer. Do the models provide value for avoiding those? Tom, I don't know if you have any insight on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. As far as I know, the models mainly account for mortality rates. So they don't take into account some of those other non-fatal issues. But if you send me an email about that, I'll get back to you.
Any other questions people have? We've had some good ones so far. Wait a couple minutes, see if anyone comes up with anything. We're also available, like I said, by email. If you have questions about your specific project, we're happy to answer those by email too if things come up.
Yeah, and feel free to raise your hand if you want to verbally ask your question instead of using the Q&A chat box. Thanks.
Thanks, John. He said, great webinar, thank you. What is the definition of a small port? So for the small shipyard, it depends on the, sorry, I might give you guys whiplash here, but depending on the grant, they might have different definitions. So you would want to check the grant solicitation specifically. But like this small shipyard grant, they identify facilities with fewer than 1,200 production employees. But there could be multiple definitions to go off of on that. So I would check the solicitation if you're looking at a specific grant, make sure that you fall within that eligibility.
Got another question asking if it's better to be focused and simple or include a lot of sub-projects that together make up the cargo moving process.
Good question. So it depends on the project specifically, I would say. You want to make sure that you're like if you have sub projects, you want to make sure that you're referencing the priorities of the solicitation that are outlined and the scoring criteria, and make sure that all of those sub projects are adding up to those larger priorities for the solicitation. So you want to make sure that everything you have in there is all tied together the right way. And throughout the proposal, even in the budget, work plan, things like that, and showing how they're all tied together and meaningful within that effort. So yeah, I mean, it just depends on what project and sub-project you're working on, but I wouldn't try to overcomplicate the proposal either, because when you're writing a grant, you always want to think about what you're writing in regard to how the reviewer will see it. So they're going to be reviewing potentially multiple applications, and you want to make it easy for your reviewer to understand what you're getting at in your proposal, make it easy for them to score it, and make it so that they don't have to hunt around for details and things like that. So that'd be another thing I'd think through on there, is just make sure if you have a lot of sub projects that are leading up to that overall goal, that it's really easy for that reviewer, maybe break it down in a table or something like that, make it easy for them to understand how it's all these sub projects are necessary and worthwhile.
If there's no other questions, I would just close with a thank you to everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, we'll be sharing out the slides and recording with all the attendees. If you're interested in the Jumpstart program, for us, it's due March 19th. And what this means is we'll provide up to 5 hours of initial grant contract with Grant Management Associate. And then after that, you would be on your own to work with GMA to finalize the application. But if you're interested in saying like, hey, is my project competitive and just like having all the right pieces in place. We have a small limited number of funds to support that effort. And then we're so thankful to Tom and ICCT for their efforts to quantify the emission reduction and human health benefits of port electrification activities pro bono. This is great service, and we hope you reach out and please take advantage of that. We'll give it maybe a few more minutes in case there's any last minute questions, but yeah, thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, I really appreciate everyone's time today and looking at these opportunities. There's a lot of funding out there, so be great to put it to use in some worthwhile projects.
We've got a raised hand from Charles. I will allow you to talk, Charles. You can unmute.
Okay, Tom, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your so Charles, I'm with the Port of Richmond in California, and I'm new to Richmond, relatively new here. What's your engagement model for your organization, if I can ask? You're working with organizations on a retainer basis or project basis, or just I know it's a broader call, but just an overview of how you work and how you engage with industry.
Yeah, for sure. So at Grant Management Associates, we typically work on a project basis and we work hourly. So we have a really detailed scope of work estimate that we prepare for each grant, where it outlines each requirement we need to fulfill, each task that needs to be done, basically. And depending on how large the grant is, we'll identify a team of however many people needed to complete that effort. And then we assign a number of hours to each task that needs to be done. So it gives us a really detailed cost estimate to go from. We offer grant management or grant proposal development on a number of levels, going from full service, where we take care of most everything with some input from the client. But we do most everything on that full service level, and then all the way down to grant review. And then we do some pre-work exercises too, where we do grant research and build a custom library that you can navigate through. We navigate through the funding opportunities and compile a library that you can go through and start to map out what you want to go for grants. And then we also offer a key considerations analysis, where we basically do a pre-scoring, a really in-depth pre-scoring of the grant to understand where the proposal is strong and where it's weak, and where we might be able to make some modifications and rescope some things to make it more competitive. So yeah, we help out in a lot of different ways, and even beyond that, we have a lot of other services that we offer with our team. So yeah.
Cool. Okay, no, thanks. I'll follow up and I'll dig into what you have online as well. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for asking. It looks like Rachel's wondering if recordings will be shared, and yes, they will.
Great. Well, it looks like those were all the questions that we got. Thank you so much again for tuning in. Be on the lookout for the slides as well as the recording shortly. And yeah, thanks for joining.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Here.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.